Thank you very, very much indeed. You have brought us back to reality with some very frightening possibilities if everybody doesn't do what they need to do. It's not possible to sum up what you have said. I think perhaps we have agreed and that we are extremely grateful to Kaun and his friends and the Heart of Asia, the foundation, the Kakarko Foundation, for publishing this book. We hope that this book will receive great attention inside Afghanistan, in the region around Afghanistan, and in the rest of the world. The other thing is that peace in Afghanistan is extremely important, not only for the Afghan people, of course, most of all for the Afghan people, but also for their neighbors. And their neighbors have got to be a little bit more responsible, dare I say, than they have been in the past, and perhaps work together and with others to help Afghanistan make peace and not war. I will now pass it on to Rada for I haven't said myself at the beginning because I wasn't there, how grateful we all are to the Indian National Center for hosting us, and how much we sympathize with the Indian people in this suffering from this pandemic, like and more than a lot of other people around the world. So I thank you, apologize for being late and disturbing a little bit your proceedings. And Rada, it's up to you it's all over to you to conclude. And maybe ask a couple of questions, see if we can reply to a couple of questions. Rada, it's to you.
Thank you, Lakhtar. There had been a series of questions, the bulk of which revolve around this all-important issue of what happens when the US withdraws. Will there be a vacuum? Will different actors step into the vacuum? What will be the international reactions? How is the region going to behave? Are we going to see again a polarization amongst regional actors? Some of these questions, I would say, have been answered by several of the panelists. Some of them are impossible to answer. We cannot say, will there be a vacuum? At the moment, it seems that we are in a period of innumerable collective and bilateral and trilateral and quadrilateral discussions without any clear consensus recommendations emerging. So what we can say is that this is a time when we would hope that there would be far more active and intense discussion, especially amongst regional, by which I mean neighbors of Afghanistan, to start thinking concretely about what they can do to try to prevent a vacuum and try to prevent conflict re-emerging, whether in Afghanistan or within the region at large. So that, I think, is an issue that hopefully is going to gain more and more attention in the coming days. Other questions. One of the questions was whether there will be a relapse into ethnic conflict. I don't think there will, but that is a question, I think, for other panelists to address. There were several questions specifically for you, Lakhtar. I don't know whether you particularly want to answer them. They're also quite general questions relating to your experience as a negotiator in the past, and how would you see it today?
There is one question.
And finally, of course, please.
There is one question perhaps worth trying to answer, and that is that why, whether we tried to invite the Taliban to the Bonn conference. We didn't.
Right.
November 2001, it was unthinkable to think of inviting the Taliban. The picture that was in everybody's mind was that of two towers in New York. But I believe now the big mistake we made was in January, February, March 2002, when we were in Kabul. It was a very simple question. We asked too timidly, and there was unanimity telling us, forget about it. That question is, the Taliban have been defeated. They have been routed, as a matter of fact. They have disappeared. A lot of people have been killed. A lot of people have been arrested. But hundreds of thousands of Taliban have just melted in the country. Where did they go? This question, some have asked, but there was unanimity. Russia, India, Iran, the United States all said, forget about it. The Taliban are gone. You don't have to worry about them. That was a very, very big mistake. Talking to the Taliban in 2002 would have been much, much better than talking to the Taliban today. Radha?
Yeah. Which adds, of course, to the problems that Afghanistan will face quite soon. I was thinking that perhaps we could just each of us take a couple of minutes to make concluding remarks based on the questions that we've seen. The second set of questions revolved around the issue of aid, social and economic aid for social and economic development in Afghanistan, which again obviously will depend to some extent on the security situation there. I just want to say that my concluding remark is that the most critical element is going to be how will the Afghanistan security and defense forces integrate? If the Taliban is going to integrate with them, in which way is this going to be made possible? Are we going to be thinking about some international experts overseeing an integration process? It's difficult to imagine the Taliban accepting something like that, but in the absence of that, how on earth is this integration process going to take place? And of course, without integration, the prospects for security are going to be very dim. Now, when I say that, let me also say that I would again think that the region or the different neighbors of Afghanistan do have to come up with ideas on how to help the security situation. Without that, and without some consensus agreement that the neighbors will not encourage flows of arms and fighters into Afghanistan, which is, of course, a problem that both Dr. Najibullah and Professor highlighted. The chances of any process of peace taking hold post-withdrawal are going to be very dim. Should we just go around seeing what are the main questions that require answering? Barney, you've read the questions. There are some that are specifically related to your knowledge and analysis. Afrasiab, I think you answered quite a large number of the questions, but you might still wish to say a few words about how a regional conversation by which not just some members of the region, but at least the 8 to 10 neighboring Heart of Asia countries can come back, can revive a discussion, whether it was, on the Istanbul format or whether it was a smaller type of track to civil society regional discussions that we did at one time at the Delhi Policy Group, whether those initiatives at this point in time could help at all, is something that perhaps Javed and you could both look at. And finally, let me just say the book is available on Amazon for anyone who's interested in buying it. Barney?
Okay, well, thank you. Briefly, first, I'll just say that there is a decision point for Pakistan coming up, as President Ghani actually highlighted in an article he wrote that came out in Foreign Affairs yesterday, and that is Pakistan has stated, and the Pakistan military has stated, that it does not want the restoration of the Islamic Emirate in Afghanistan. It provided resources and sanctuary to the Taliban because of various security concerns it had about the role of India and perhaps because of radical currents in the military. But now there are reports, maybe they're a little beyond rumors, that the Pakistan military is telling the Taliban that at this point they have to make some concessions, and that if not, they will meet some consequences. I hesitate to believe that. Of course, one has heard it before. But if there were ever a time when Pakistan might make that decision, it would be now, both because of the change in the situation in Afghanistan and for the reasons that Afrasiab Khattak mentioned. That is, Pakistan does have that economic vulnerability now and is under pressure from the Financial Action Task Force over its support for terrorism. Finally, there's the question of the role of the United Nations. We havenent mentioned that, even though Mr. Brahimi is here. The U.S. has, of course, UNAMA is still there, headed by an SRSG. The U.S. has called for and gotten the appointment of a personal representative of the Secretary General, who will be Mr. Jean Arnaud, to facilitate the peace process. But one aspect, there's one major difference between the U.S. position on the UN and that of the region. That is, the U.S. at first asked the UN to convene the powers of the region to try to reach consensus. And the region, Pakistan opposed that because of the inclusion of India. Russia opposed it because Russia has its own regional process, the Moscow process. And you'll note that in the recent statement by the Troika, the expanded Troika, there was no mention of a regional role for the United Nations. I think this is a serious obstacle because the fact is what Afrasiab referred to as the possibility of a renewed, well, let's say great power competition rather than Cold War on the Eurasian continent. It's something that could be very fatal for Afghanistan if the countries in the region do not reach some kind of multilateral agreement on what they will accept and support in terms of the nature of the Afghan security forces, what will be its defense and supply relationships, whether they will be able to establish some confidence building measures about to alleviate the fear that all of them have of covert action by other powers in the region and so on. And I think that the United Nations could play a very useful facilitating role in this if the great powers on the continent, Russia and China in particular, are willing to engage with it. So far it's unclear. It seems that they are resisting that.
If I may, just on this, the convening power of the United Nations is cannot be equaled, and one day everybody will say, the UN is welcome, but I hope it will not be too late. So the earlier the UN is given an important role, not just a seat around the table, a very important role, the better for everyone. In 1992, if Benon Sevan had been allowed to start to implement the program that he had worked out with everyone, that everyone had agreed to, perhaps that Afghanistan would have been taken in a different way. So I hope that this opportunity is not missed once again.
Yeah, thank you. Javed, you wanted to say something?
I just thought, I think there was one question at least, and probably more about what will happen and what's the prospect of a civil war. And I just wanted to address that. That when, I mean, obviously, if I was actually thinking about something very similar this morning myself when I woke up to a glorious sunny Kabul, so peaceful. So I mean, spring in Kabul is obviously so beautiful. It's incredible, and then it rained later on, and it couldn't be a more normal place. I mean, it couldn't be more. Couldn't be far from those kind of scenarios. But I wish that I thought that the civil war scenario was unthinkable. I think it's very much a possibility, especially what we are seeing right now is on both sides. In fact, not just from the Taliban side. Here in Kabul as well, the peace agenda or the peace sort of process is losing momentum very, very rapidly. The cancellation of the Istanbul conference was a blow for whatever reason it was. We won't go into it, but it shouldn't have been allowed to happen. And now we, in the absence of a roadmap right now to speak of, the war scenarios are increasingly gaining momentum, gaining ground, and I think that's and especially with the sort of on the other side with on the U.S. Role, decreasing role, diminish, as I mentioned earlier, in the peace process. Who is going to sort of champion a return to this to that process when Afghans themselves are obviously a part of the conflict. So we need champions, and that's why precisely I think this discussion today has been very useful to say that we need regional champions now to take it, to not just be the passive players and invitees to meetings. They actually have to take it upon themselves to just say, well, let's actually do something about this. The Taliban must not be allowed to be able to decide terms. So as I was saying, that this conference must not have been allowed, because right now one of the important sources of this war scenario is a very strong belief that the Taliban have actually communicated. It's not like they are hiding it in the back of their minds. They're actually talking about the fact that it's that what the process over the last 2 years, from their point of view, was really a negotiation of a U.S. withdrawal, and now that has been achieved. As far as Afghans are concerned, they've never really committed very clearly to an intra-Afghan peace agenda. So, and that has to be created with help of the region. Now, so I'll stop at that.
Very good.
Thank you. Afrasiab?
Yes, thank you, Ram. I take the opportunity to express my solidarity with Indian brothers who are facing this pandemic. We are with them in these tough times. I would just like to say that for having sort of regional activity, we must focus on reviving these track 2 meetings. And since because of the pandemic, it can't be done physically, so we can start it virtually by virtual meetings. And I think you had great experience, Radha, when you used to have those trilateral meetings, Pakistan, Afghanistan, India. But these were not just trilateral. You remember you would always invite Iran, Russia, Chinese, Central Asians. So that sort of is very good. For starting this track 1, we need to activate track 2. And I think if situation allows our Indian friends, our dairy policy group, for example, had very great experience. Our friends from Heart of Asia Society in Kabul, they do a great job, and I think they are capable of organizing some of these activities. And we can also pitch in from Pakistan and our diasporas in the Western countries. So I think that is something that we should immediately focus on. Thank you.
Thank you. I was actually going to suggest to Javed that perhaps the Heart of Asia Society and the Kakar Foundation might think of doing some regional dialogues. And we can certainly, I can pass on to you all the notes and so on from the previous ones, as well as
Absolutely.
contacts.
Well, thank you so much for that suggestion. It's very much what we are thinking ourselves. Some we already do, but I think specifically on the point by Khatak Saib, I think it's no. We would be obviously delighted. So maybe offline we can follow this up. But it's very much consistent with one of the things that we are doing on the track 2 dialogue front already.
Great. Last words to Javan.
Well, thank you very much, Radha. I think I would like to say that we have to give a chance to peace to Afghanistan. So we have to give it a chance. And I think I agree very much with Ambassador Ludin that there is a possibility that a civil war can happen in Afghanistan, but that doesn't mean that people in Afghanistan want a civil war. So this is something that Kakar Foundation and Heart of Asia Society have been kind of trying to promote it as some form of a civil conversation in Afghanistan. And we had recently an event at Kabul University that why it's important for us that we should actually think positive and move forward and not think of a civil war. So that is something that we should just keep remember. And I think then obviously everyone talked about the role of the region. So yes, it's important, but I think Afghans and Pakistanis and Indians and everyone else in the region should have very open, transparent, and public conversation. I think it's important to be connected to the wider global world, and we are going to be connected, whether we want it or not, Afghans. But I think the future of Afghanistan, as it is actually very well said in the forward note to the volume, that the region itself, like Iran, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, these countries matter more to Afghanistan than the United States. Yes, the United States is a major global power, and we can't escape that. But the truth is also that we live in a very different part of the world, and that's something that Afghans have to realize and find their ways around that and work their way. So. That's I will end my remarks there. I will definitely encourage everyone to read the volume. I think it's an exciting volume. There are different essays from different people, and I'm sure they are not going to regret from just reading a fresh perspective on what has happened in the past and what's happening now in the present, or maybe not in the future. So I invite everyone to just have a look and read it. Thank you.
Thank you, Javan. It remains for me to thank our moderator, Lakhdar Brahimi, for so skillfully managing to keep us within time, and the India International Center, in particular Tete of the Program Committee, for organizing this book discussion, and Wasim for ensuring that after the first hiccups, the technology has been seamless. And of course, thank you to all of you who were kind enough to log into this discussion and to give us so many interesting questions to answer. I was really impressed to see we have people from, obviously some from Afghanistan, but also from Turkey, from the US, and from England, and from Pakistan listening in. So thank you again, India International Center, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you all.